Okay, so it is that time of the uh, in our history where most people are at home, and when you're at home, a lot of us stay alone or do not know what to do, and then everything starts to slowly play on your mind, and it's like this never ending tape recorder that we used to have during our time, where it would go in circles and come back to the same sound and then go around, or record player that actually would make the same sound after some time, and after a while that sound kind of gets to you, and you're telling yourself, no, I don't think I want to have that anymore, and then everything starts to feel yucky. And that's exactly what's happening with a lot of people around us. The word given to it is very modern, and it's called depression, but it's as old as the hills, and that's what we're talking about today. And to start things off, I'd like to ask you guys, one, uh, what exactly to you guys is depression, and what's the difference between a sadness and a depression? I'll go with Sanjay first.
Sadness is just one of the emotions, like laughter, crying, and so many other emotions. Sadness could be one of those emotions. But when it comes to depression, depression multiplies sadness by 100, or maybe whatever number that you want to multiply, and it is a feeling, or it's a psychological feeling, wherein you have this feeling of sinking feeling. You have this feeling of not being worthy of anything. I don't feel like doing things. You don't feel like taking interest in your routine work, in a daily work. You lose interest completely, and then so many things attached with it. So sadness is like one of the emotions, and depression could be the final sort of the I don't
Like
know
if
how
a
to
lot
put
of
it
things
across,
came
but the
together
final nail in the coffin.
in the coffin.
When
Okay. Okay. Pooja, what is your take on the difference between sadness and depression, and how close have you seen it happen?
Um, Denzel, I have had my own share of struggle with bouts of depression in the past until I adopted a more holistic approach to life. You know, things have changed. But I can totally differentiate between the everyday blues or, situational depression where it's very short term in nature. Whereas long term depression, if it's probably not nipped in the bud and we don't seek medical intervention, so it uh, gradually ultimately leads to a full blown or rather clinical depression where you need medical intervention, psychotherapy, or medical care. It could be cognitive behavior therapy or whatever. I mean, Sangeeta would be better able to talk about that since she's a therapist. But from my own experience, I can say I know the difference. There could be short term
Okay.
and then long
Yeah.
term, which needs medical intervention.
Right. Sangeeta, I'm coming to you, and this is essentially as far as depression is concerned.
I think
Is there still a stigma attached to it? Because I know out here a lot of people will never own up to the fact that they are depressed. Why? One, why is there stigma? And two, is that stigma still there? Or now do you find things are much better and people come out and talk?
let me answer your first question. I sort of think of sadness as the temporary younger cousin of depression. It can be bad for people. Sadness is not a pleasant emotion, even if it's milder than depression. Depression for me is that, well, not for me. Generally, depression is where you have this complete inability to see the positive side of things, and it is anything a sadness that lasts, I think, more than a month definitely classifies as you are technically depressed. uh, and it is, I do believe it is the worst thing any human being can suffer. There is nothing worse than being depressed. Going back to the stigma, yes, there is an absolute stigma, and the stigma comes from every direction. It is so built into our culture. You have to be happy no matter what. You have to be satisfied no matter what. And yet we have magazines and media and people and Facebook and everyone telling us, oh, look at my great life. You have to be like this. You have to be like that. And this cognitive dissonance between what you believe is happening to you and what you think should be happening to you, this can result in in an incredible negative spiral for a lot of people. I believe things like psychology should be a mandatory part of education from the time children are about 13 or 14. It doesn't happen. We're not taught. We're not taught to realize what kind of people we're dealing with, who we want to grow into, what makes us happy, what doesn't really make us happy. Everything is so prescribed for all of us. And this world we live in today has become a very harsh world. Life isn't simple as it used to be. We have a different set of challenges. Social media has come into play. Commercialism has skyrocketed in the last 20 years. And all of that together, you look at political situations, you look at family units melting down, relationships, the nature of them are changing all over the world. And all of it together, I think it just gets too much for our minds to handle sometimes. And it can lead, from my personal experience, yes, I have gone through severe depressions. I've tried to take my own life twice. I was trapped in a bad marriage. And the reasons for depression can be many, but the solution is removing the stigma, getting people to talk about it openly. And honestly, Denzil, Pooja, and Sanjay, thank you so much for bringing this out into the open and having a conversation about it, because it's so important.
I think more important today than ever before. And Pooja, coming back to you, how would you classify sadness versus depression? How would you know when you're depressed and when you're sad? What is the kind of feeling that you have? What when you're with something like this?
A long-term depression is more debilitating. It completely leaves you dysfunctional, and you're not productive, and it leaves you feeling so unproductive at the end of the day. And there are so many things you're not able to do. So it's much, much more than just a temporary phase that most of us go through. It's a very natural process for every human being to process all kinds of information. But when it becomes a clinical depression, or when it becomes long term, then lots of other things can happen. There could be psychotic um, um, part to it. It could be schizophrenia, bipolar, or there are a lot of different types of depression, that only a therapist or a psychologist can really tell you. But mostly you become dysfunctional and you're not able to function productively in society. You cannot go for jobs. It just leaves you very debilitated. That's what I can say.
Yeah, and Sanjay, and in a circumstance like this, what do you think is what is the first thing that somebody should do when they're completely handicapped by this very overall in feeling of being sad all the time, being depressed, not able to do anything, everything seems bad, everything seems negative. What's the first thing that you think a person should do at a point like this?
I think the first thing anybody who is going through this should do is to reach out to people. Very important to reach out to your people, to your friends, your family, because depression is one thing which kills you from inside. You're suffering, you're going through it yourself, but then you don't want others to know. That is not a correct approach. You rather tell people, go to psychologists, therapists, and meet people and be open about it and talk about it. Then there is a solution. If you keep it to yourself, it'll go from bad to worse. So that is most important thing, to be open about it and approach people.
Yeah, but I think before the going out and talking to people, I think the first thing would be to accept the fact that you are in a situation. I think a lot of times we don't accept. I get a lot of people who talk to me and they are not really willing to accept the fact that it's a mental thing. पता है fever हो गया तो किसी को कोई problem नहीं होती. मतलब बुखार ही है. But मतलब अगर मेरा दिमाग ठीक नहीं चल रहा तो लोग कहते हैं पता है मैं तो पागल हूँ. People will think that of me is the reaction that you get right at the top. So I think the acceptance of the fact that you have it, that is larger than everything else, because once you've accepted it, then you can do something about it. I think a lot of time we live in denial. What do you say about that, Sangeetha?
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Denzil. Sadness is a temporary emotion, and a depression is actually an illness. And
Yes,
understanding it's an illness
exactly.
and not a failing, and getting this out into the into the wider world is, I think, that should be one of the primary messages that the media should be looking at. It is a severe illness. It is, as Pooja said, a debilitating illness. You are unable to find joy in anything. And I completely agree with Sanjay. The first thing you do is you reach out. The problem, unfortunately, with reaching out is most people have this attitude, chalo, chalo, come on, chin up, it's okay, it's going to get better. Come on, smile, have a drink. This seems to be without, and I think this is where people get stuck when they're really suffering. Finding the right resources to reach out to, this becomes a problem. And this is one of the problems why mental health is growing across the world. There aren't enough professionals, there isn't enough understanding. But absolutely, yes, keep trying, find someone who will understand what you're going through and will sort of hold space for you while you're going through it. It is not a terminal illness. It should not be a terminal illness.
Very true. But what Sanjay would you say for somebody who, for instance, comes to you and says that, I do not know how to cope with life anymore? What would of course, there is a story and there is depression and you know that. What would your advice to somebody like that be? What would the first advice be?
More than advice, I would say that the person is forthcoming with the fact that he's into depression and he's reaching out to me. More than giving advice, it would be very nice if we be a little compassionate towards that person, right? And then maybe take it one day at a time and understand the problem and maybe ask him to go to therapist or maybe psychologist or psychiatrist as the requirement, as per the requirement. And but being compassionate is, I think, most important here.
That's another thing, Pooja, that people don't want to go to doctors over this. So,
Yes.
and I've seen this happen to me. I've seen people who've come to me and said that, oh, we're happy to talk to you, but we don't want to go to a doctor, So how would you handle something like that if somebody came to you with a problem? When would you say, no, I cannot do this, let's take you to a doctor?
Denzil, I would give my own example. And the bouts of depression that I have suffered, overcome it, and I have struggled many years with it, but now thankfully I'm free of it. So I would give my own example, and I think that would be inspiring, that might help and motivate. And I would, if I would try to sound convincing, and if I cannot, then probably I will seek help outside, externally, maybe a medical professional who is professionally able to deal with a situation like this, because we cannot ignore that. We don't know what that might lead to. The person can even take his own life, might be suicidal.
There are about 250,000 people who commit suicide globally.
Yes,
Yes.
and I'm sure
One year.
there are more people now who are in this state than ever before. What would your advice to them be? Because right now they're at home. You might not even be able to go to a doctor. So what can you do sitting at home? And a lot of this, I think, is also mild depression just because of the circumstance that you're in. So what would your advice to somebody like that be, Sanjay?
So it would be making the best out of the worst. In the present scenario, where the pandemic and we are all isolated and homebound, have not been able to step out and meet a doctor or see a doctor and get it diagnosed or get the appropriate medication from them. So the best thing would be to again via Zoom or via so many social media options that you have, reach out to people, talk to people, and try to be creative at home. Keep a busy schedule, keep a routine at home, and there would be certain things which you wouldn't have done or wanted to do. So do that, develop some hobby, and make a tight routine. Keep yourself occupied, keep yourself busy, so that those kind of feelings or the depressive feeling doesn't come to your mind. It will come, experience it, let it go, and get back to your normal routine, and make sure that you are doing continuously or at something and not sitting idle, and mind is not idle.
Very true. And I'd add to that, Sanjay, by saying that one of the very good things that you can do, and I've seen this work a lot of really well with people, is meditation. I think it's a very good tool to calm depression. It's a very good tool to focus the mind a little bit, even if you're not doing it very largely, even if you're just a novice at it, even if you're just spending time quietly and trying to focus on your breath. That in itself kind of helps a lot. In my experience, that has helped a lot. Sangeeta, when people come to you, yeah, and since you counsel a lot, um, how do you go about bringing a person back? What is there a toolkit to this, or is there how do you go about it? Is each case different?
One of the things that most people look for when they come for counseling, and what one should offer, is complete non-judgmental love and compassion. Whatever you are in that space at that moment, I accept you. I understand what you're going through, and I'm holding space for you. And if you can get that across to them within the first 5 or 10 minutes, it's a very, very healing thing. That in itself is very healing, to know that somebody is there for you regardless of what your situation is.
Listening in, yeah, that's an extremely important part of this thing. And one question that most people don't talk about, and that of course is the fact that part of this is the whole territory of self harm, and that's a very big territory. So how does one deal with self harm, the desire to self harm, one, and two, how do you combat something like that? Sanjay,
Are you addressing
I'd like you
me?
to get Sanjay in on this, because Sanjay is not uh, part of this.
So how do I deal with it?
Like
You know,
suppose somebody you came to know that somebody was indulging in self harm, especially the younger generation. I know a lot of people are very close to it. It's also peer pressure. There are lots of other circumstances that lead to something like this. What would your advice to be? How would you deal with something like that, especially with somebody who comes to you?
somebody suicidal or on the verge of committing suicide, the depression has gone so intense. In that case, the first thing would be, as we said, we all agree to that: be compassionate, and be loving towards that person, understanding his problem or her problem. And thereafter, requirement is to immediately take the person to the person who can actually guide him. Because I, as a layman, have not gone through any major depression syndrome, so I don't know actually about it. So better to take it, her or him, to a place or to a person who can actually guide him properly. But before you do that, be loving and compassionate towards that person.
Sangeeta, we always look at the downside of depression. Is there an upside to depression as well?
Yes, there is. Absolutely, there is. I think when you successfully come out of a depression, and most people do, by the way, because as I said, this is not a terminal illness, the ability to feel joy, to feel gratitude, to really embrace life is enormous. It is enormous. You really appreciate, and you grow, you become stronger as a person. You battle something so intense within yourself, and you come out of it, and suddenly you're stronger. You're a better person for it. And sometimes, to get to the light, you have to go through the darkness.
Right, and I think that's very, very important. Pooja, coming to you, uh, once you're out of depression, how do you stay there? Because I sometimes feel that when it comes upon you, there is always that fear that it will visit you again. Is that fear a very real fear? And how do you kind of stay straight? Straight is a bad word, but yeah, matlab, I meant stay focused and balanced.
Denzil, I think if you go towards Western medicine, it's a quick fix. I don't think it eliminates depression from its root. So I believe in a more holistic approach, which I have adopted and which has worked for me, and my counseling, of course, with Sangeetha Shende as well. So I think Ayurveda is the way for depression somehow, because it kind of syncs your energies inside you. It gives you a complete balance. We talk about the sattvic or the rajas or the tamasic energies which we have in our body, which regulates our body. So the rajasic and the tamasic energies are very, very sensitive. to what we eat, to what we consume, what we think, our actions. So when there is imbalance in it, our doshas or tendencies, like the negative tendencies, like let's say greed, anger, lust, jealousy, maya, all this gets aggravated in our body, and that directly affects our mental makeup. So it's mental well-being. So it's very important to keep all these energies in sync through Ayurveda, through adopting a very sattvic lifestyle. Because once you do that, somehow that guarantees that your root cause of depression will be eliminated. Okay, because medication will help you, maybe everything else will help you, but it will not eliminate the problem from its root cause. And of course, cognitive behavior therapy helps a lot, which Sangeetha also practices. You need to change your perception, the way you think, your entire mental makeup, and then that assures that you will stay calm and collected. I think so. I don't know.
That's true.
I practice it. It's worked for me. Yeah.
So Sanjay, what would you say is the route for somebody who's depressed? Say if there were step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, how should somebody go about it? What should the person do?
For remedial purpose or
Remedial
root
purpose.
cause?
Both.
Okay, so root cause of depression, there could be so many triggers could be there. There could be so many triggers. There could be childhood trauma. There could be, like for example, I being in the army and served in JNK and other places, I have different kind of depression there. Because isolation, there is not being able to socialize, meet people, talk to them, even there were no telephones there. So that is another, I don't know the steps, but there are different types of depression which each one of us might face or encounter in our lives. But I don't know what are the steps, but then and we have to deal with it according to our situations. So that is how I think it is. And solutions, as we have already discussed, solutions: be compassionate, be loving, go to a proper medical professional, and then also now Pooja is saying do meditation, breathing exercise, the Ayurveda, and there's so many other philosophies which you can bank on for your mental well-being. And there's so many things actually available to you. Only thing is that you have to have the willpower to actually go there and accept it that you have a problem. Go there, and ways and methods are always there.
So, Sangeetha, finally, as far as depression is concerned, the family of the person who's depressed are very much part of the illness and the process. What would your advice to somebody? Because a lot of times you tend to, especially in India, you tend to say, "Nahi, nahi, mera bachcha theek ho jayega." It's that kind of attitude that you have. So, how do you think that the family should deal with it?
I think first and foremost, families, especially in India, where the fear of shame is such a big thing, and a mental illness is viewed as such a sin, such a flaw in a person that it is, unerasable, and it's going to haunt them and our society sort of makes it difficult for parents as well. At the end of the day, the stigma is huge, and so they're under huge pressure as well. So the sort of sweeping things under the carpet does not work. It needs to be handled with love, compassion, acceptance. And in India, I find especially a lot of depression, especially amongst the younger people, actually stems from family circumstances. Unbelievable, ridiculous pressures to conform to a way of life that no longer serves them in this day and age, but they're expected to conform to it because of their parental expectations, and it creates such a dissonance. It is terrible. And I think sort of educating parents that, you are of a different generation, of a different time. You cannot live in the time of your children. This is a different time. They have different challenges, different futures, a future you cannot step in, even as Rumi says, even in your wildest dreams, you cannot live in their future. And allowing children the space to carve their own lives, make their own decisions, to make their own mistakes. One of my recent writers wrote a beautiful thing. She wrote a letter to her parents, and she said, at 23, you decided I was old enough to get married, and I was old enough to have children. But apparently I wasn't old enough to decide who I should do this with.
Okay.
And to me, that in some ways sums up the whole, sort of context within this culture. Of course, in the West, there are different issues. There are different, a whole set of different paradigms that come in. Depressions tend to be reactive. Yes, if you have a severe mental illness of some sort, if you're bipolar, you have severe PTSD, yes, the depression is clinical, it's in your head, it's physiological. But most depressions are reactive. You are reacting to a situation, to a loss, a sense of not being able to achieve what you want to achieve, of having to conform to standards you're unable to conform to. And helping people manage that process, I think, is the key to successfully handling depression. At the end of the day, the person has to help themselves. And yes, families have to be involved, but this is extremely hard.
Pooja, how much do you think will contributes to this? Since
Willpower. Sorry. Willpower.
you have to be a very strong person to get over depression, and how much does will contribute to it? What is what's the role of the will, the mind, in what you're doing?
At a very nascent stage, at when you are just falling into depression, you might have the willpower, but once you have crossed a certain stage of depression, then I think there are some parts in your brain, maybe your neurons or whatever, just shuts down, and you are not able to have that willpower anymore. You need external support. You just can't snap out of depression at that point. So willpower works to a certain stage. I don't think once you cross, because I've been there, once you cross a certain stage where you are clinically depressed, willpower will not really work.
I would agree with that.
It does not generally. I don't know about others, but for
So
me,
then you'd need, at that point in time, you'd certainly need help to get you through all of this. But yeah, thank you so much,
Absolutely,
guys. I think this was a brilliant discussion. Also, it will be of great use to people who right now may be battling with it. And I'd always say that we should just wish them well. One. Two, it's very apparent that the biggest thing of them all is the fact that you need to reach out. Once you've reached out to the correct people, it will be taken care of. But the reaching out is extremely important. So yes, reach out to Sangeetha is the idea, and to Sanjay and to Pooja.
We're all gonna reach out to
And
you,
to
Denzil.
Denzil.
We're all gonna be harassing you from John. That's it. Be prepared.
But
You are the guru.
no, I don't see myself there. But anyways, the fact of the matter is, yes, reach out and it will be taken care of, and give it time, and accept the fact that it is something that you're dealing with, and something that you need to repair for yourself, for your own good and that of your soul. Thank you so much, guys, for joining me, and we'll see you next
Thank
week
you.
on another of these
Thank
discussions.
you.
I hope
Thank
it's
you,
useful.
Denzil.
Goodbye.
And please, everybody subscribe to this channel. It's extremely important. If
Yeah.
you've not done that so far, please subscribe and press the bell icon so that you can get all the updates that you need to get. And we'll come back to you next week with another great discussion. Till then, it's bye from all of us, right?